Okay, this is Mr. Magliari. I'm Vice Principal here at Keokuk Middle School. I have Abe Lambert here. He's our 7th grade math teacher, correct?
Yes.
All right. And we did your observation yesterday. And what was some things that, what was the main objective of your lesson?
The main objective of the lesson was to help students understand how to graph points on a coordinate plane using both positive and negative coordinates, and also to be able to locate objects and locations on a pre-existing plane. We also talked a bit about the scale of the coordinate plane, depending on what numbers you work with, how large of a graph you need to draw, whether it involves negatives or not,
Right.
and then what scale you should have. And I focused also on precision and labeling to make it very clear.
Yeah, and sort of go off of that, I noticed you had some students coming up and actually plotting points on the board. What was, so they basically just came up and plotted them, or?
That was a sort of a warm-up activity because we'd done a little bit with that the day before.
Okay.
So just to get them to, number one, remember what we had talked about.
Right.
And number two, it was an opportunity to get the students moving around, involved in the lesson a little bit, and for them to be able to check their own work with other students.
Yeah, and so I think we're going to start today with obviously the introduction and then going over some strength areas that I saw in your evaluation. First one, you demonstrated content frequently throughout. You were very content oriented. What's your background in math? What, you know?
I am a certified math teacher. I didn't go to school originally to be a math teacher, so I did a post-college certification, but it involved all the usual math classes expected. It's a secondary degree,
Yeah.
so a lot of higher level math there, and several methods courses.
I noticed that, but when you were giving your lesson, you bring it down for our
Okay.
kids, and I really noticed that in your lesson. You did a good job slowing things down. One of the things I noticed was you ask a lot of questions, and one of my questions off of that is I noticed you were probing the students more. So after my observation, did you start thinking about that with your lessons?
Did. I especially took your point that you made about the open-ended questions. We talked about the different kinds of questions I had asked, and I thought that open-ended questions are definitely something that's more difficult to find in math, being that most of the time you're looking for one answer. So
Right.
they got to find that answer. So I have been trying to think of ways to involve more open-ended questions, but I also really like to ask a lot of questions because I want to get as good an idea as I can about what the students already know and where I need to go with my lessons.
So it kind of helps pace your lesson.
Yeah,
as you-
definitely.
Great.
Definitely.
What were some things you thought went well yesterday?
I felt like the understanding was pretty good. The 7th graders do have a little bit of experience in 6th grade with graphing,
Okay.
mostly with positives. So a lot of that was some sort of relearning for them. The previous day was a little bit slower, but I feel like they picked it up pretty well. We still had some minor issues that were expected, but when we started off having them make their own graph, that went a lot quicker than it had the day before. And then when they were asked to be able to locate points on the examples in their book, I thought they did a very good job of that.
Yeah, I thought so too. So I noticed you do a lot of independent practice in class as well. One of the things I noticed when the kids were independently working on their things was that you do a great job of sort of guiding that practice. And so is it something where you try to hit every student each day when you're guiding your practice? Or
I wish I could. I mean, I often think that if I was able to spend even 5 minutes with a single student every day,
Oh, sure.
I could accomplish a great deal. And obviously, 5 minutes times 100 students is more time than I have.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I circulate, I usually, I keep encouraging them to write things down because it's easy for me to go by and look and see, are you doing something? Is it correct? And then if I see that they don't have any problems, I kind of circulate and look for people that maybe aren't answering all the questions or are struggling to answer a few of them, and I try to hit those students. And like you said, I try to do that multiple times, so maybe the second time around I hit a different set of students.
You did a very good job of that, and I don't know if you know or not, but I had a graph, and I was kind of seeing your students where you were going, and it may not have been during the guiding process, but with your questioning techniques, I think you reached every student in that class at some point in time, so that was really good. And then you've also got a couple of resources in there too to kind of help you in guiding your lessons. Something I noticed that's been effective for you is with your classroom management. We're going over the Iowa Standard 6, A, B, and C, is your method of counting down. And is that something you've done for a long time? Or?
Something I started doing last year, just one of the ways that I've seen other teachers use, and something that that I hope eventually can kind of go away throughout the year. But it's at least a clear signal that says, okay, I have something I need to say, and I understand that you are working, talking, whatever, doing something a little different. So it gives them a little bit of time to realize that they need to refocus their attention.
Have you ever thought of any other ways to get them back on track that you've used before? Like I've been at other classrooms, they use the clap technique, or they do different certain things.
I've thought of that.
But it seems to be working for you, so why change it, right?
It's just the one I chose.
And it's a very calm countdown.
Technique, and that's one thing that I'm good at being calm, so I try to exude that calmness and hope that it is a little bit infectious towards their demeanor as well.
I know sometimes teachers get a little worried when we go in their classrooms, and it's kind of like the kids are up and they're moving. But if they're engaged, they're engaged, and if you can get them back on track, that's what we work for.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah. So next, I noticed our students were doing a lot of note taking. I noticed you checked it at the end of the class. Do you provide feedback on those notebooks when you collect them with the students?
Keeping notebooks in class is something that I've decided to try new this year.
Okay, that's new then.
It's not something that I am planning on using as an evaluative tool. It's primarily for number one, so that nobody can say they forgot it.
Okay.
They always have their materials.
Sure.
And number two, then I know when I want them to write something down that it's there. And I'm considering, using that as either a review tool or some sort of resource that they may be able to use on a test.
Okay.
Because then I know what's in the book, I know that, and I can see in class, that they have it, they're using it, and then...
yeah, because I kind of put that under standard 5. I think it's not really an assessment you put in the grade book,
right.
But it assesses learning. And I think it's probably something you use to sort of guide your lessons, or something they just kind of go back on besides a book. It's another resource.
And I hope I can get them to understand that when they put those things in their notebook, that they can refer back to them, because I think a lot of students don't really have good study or note-taking skills, especially in 7th grade. So if I say, okay, you know where it is, I saw you put it in there, because I told you to put it in there.
Right.
So if they ask me questions about that, I can say, what does your notebook say?
Well, and that kind of relates to 2C, relating ideas and information within and across content areas. So being able to take notes is a great skill they can use in any class, so that's great. So we went over your probing questions. I just noticed that you adjust your speech quite a bit when you're talking with students, and I guess I went over that earlier a little bit, your demeanor and your up and down tone with them. And you want to go a little further on that, or?
Yeah, it's normally I would think I'm fairly monotone in my speech. Just a normal conversation. But one thing, especially in mathematics, it's sometimes has a bad stigma, and a lot of kids have a bad attitude when it comes to math. So I decided, if I can't necessarily get them to love the subject matter, I can at least be more excitable and try to get them interested and engaged in the class.
Yeah.
And say, okay, and just the change of tone sort of, kind of, I don't want to say keeps, but it kind of regulates their attention.
Right.
Or if I'm just one thing all the time, they will lose what I'm saying. But, you know, if I kind of switch it up, it sort of, you know, hits their
It kind of
eardrums
does.
differently.
Yeah.
And say, oh wait, something is actually happening up there.
Yeah.
So
Do you ever
it's
use
sort
a
of-
loud volume or anything when you ever need to, or is it-
On rare occasion, I have said things quite loud. Usually, and I try to avoid that as sort of a quiet down, you know.
No,
why are you
yeah.
so loud thing, and try to use it as
just get attention?
extreme emphasis. Like this is something that's really important.
Okay.
So you know.
Yeah, and I think they feed off of your tone in there. I
Yeah.
can see that.
So I
So
make it a little bit random too, just to.
just
So
have
they
fun.
never know. They never know when it's coming. You know?
Sure. Do you feel your students understood the lesson? If so, how do you know that they understood it?
I feel like they did fairly well. We talked about one of the things is just trying to circulate a lot throughout the lesson, and hopefully that gives me enough information to where I can get a picture of the entire class. I know there may be a student or two that is reluctant to ask questions, that is reluctant to come get help later, that I need to be more careful about trying to get and make sure I hit those students as well. But from
Yeah.
the observations I made during class, I felt pretty good about it.
Okay, and if your observations had sent you a different way, do you ever come back and revisit that lesson?
Yeah,
at all?
definitely.
Okay. Because
Something I would like to do a better job of is revisiting on multiple days. You
okay,
know, if I see something going poorly in a lesson, I'll kind of do an extra example, spend a little bit more time practicing that day, but something I'd like to be able to do more is to repeat that in the next 2 or 3 days to kind of reinforce that over time and get them to remember a little bit better.
when we had our pre-conference, we talked about the students in your class, and this, compared to your other classes, for people that don't know, this is sort of your lower level math course. So I guess piggyback off what you say, you kind of slowly work our students in.
Yeah, and it depends on the day. I'd say on some days this class actually outperforms some of my other classes
Great.
because they do. They're a little bit quieter sometimes. You know, they're a little bit better paying attention than say maybe my class right after lunch.
Okay.
And this class probably has a wider range of abilities
Okay.
because I do still have a couple that I've noticed have pretty high ability, are quick to answer questions, on the ball. But there are kids that need more attention as well. So
And that kind of, again, with the questioning, I did notice that you did not keep going to those students that know the answers.
I
and
try not to.
Yeah, and a few of them I was like, hey, is it paying attention? Next thing I know, you're asking that kid a question.
Yep,
So
yep. And
that's
I
good.
like to do that. I like to, I kind of figure, and this is the rationale I give the kids, I say, if you look like you're not paying attention, you obviously know everything. So I'm gonna call on you. You know, so that's just one tactic I like to use and say, well, you know, if you're not gonna pay attention, you open yourself up to get called out.
Sure.
To say, okay, and that just kind of, sometimes they will know the answer, you know, and sometimes it just says, hey, I see you and you need to kind of stay with us.
Sure. Are there any other, what are some ways that you assess your students? I mean, besides tests, I mean, obviously that's one that every
Right,
teacher
right.
does.
I mean, some things we've talked about, just sort of the in-class, very informal observation, the walking around, seeing them, you know, while they're doing their work.
Right,
And the work that we do in class is just primarily for that purpose.
Right.
For me to assess and say, how's the lesson going? Do I need to go deeper into anything? Do I need to go over it again a second time? Something that I'm talking about with my PLC is to do more informal formative assessments like exit tickets, something that I can actually get and take away.
great,
And we're talking about using that to evaluate the standards.
awesome. What strengths that I listed do you feel like you can better develop? We just went over some strengths. Is there any of them that you feel like, you know, that you just want to go further with?
I think the demeanor is a good thing, and I think I can probably use that to bring more focus to the lesson, because I sometimes have a tendency of over-explaining, which I try to limit, because I have a lot of things that I want them to know, but me standing up and talking is not always get my point across. You know, so kind of to, it's like sometimes I hear songs that I really like. I mean, I like music, so I hear songs that I really like, and sometimes what makes it really great is the rests in the song, when nobody's playing, you know, when they pause, instead of just making noise the whole time. So that's something where I try to use the pauses to either let them process or just sort of formulate answers and so forth. But using those to kind of drive the point home would be something, and just make it more focused. Because I think there's some things that I feel like I have to say.
Yes.
But I said to a student, my perfect day would be a day in which I did not have to say anything at all. You know, either I write some instructions up on the board, maybe kind of point a couple things out, and the students understand where I'm going and can sort of take off with it. So
That sounds like my perfect day in the office here too.
Yeah.
What goals do you have for yourself moving forward? Is any goals in particular that you want to express with me today, or anything I can help you with?
I would always like to get more engagement.
Okay.
I feel like even with the way I do things, I have a really good chance to observe what the students are doing.
Sure.
But it can be difficult when I'm over with one table and there's another table where I can't guarantee the work is getting done.
Right.
So, and then a student who is really struggling, I may not have enough time to be able to answer all their questions. So just sort of trying to increase the engagement to where everybody, even working at their own level, is still doing something.
Right.
If a lot of kids get stuck and they just kind of shut down and they wait for me to get back up and do another example, but to try to get them all to be moving forward at the same time.
Yeah, it's hard to do in one class, and that's one thing we hope to utilize with our warrior time at the end of the day too, is to totally do that. So that was good with your strength areas. And you covered most standards, 1, 2, 4, 5. 3 is more the planning, so normally you'd have artifacts here and we kind of go through your planning together. So let's go to some growth areas. My first one was re-looping prior knowledge. I guess I didn't know when I was in there that you were re-looping actually when you started class. You want to?
Yeah, like I said, we had done something similar the previous day, which is often how the book is structured. One day is sort of a exploration, discovery type of day, basic ideas, and then the next day is more technical, mathematics, in-depth stuff. And like I said before, I would like to be able to sort of come back with maybe just a warm-up 2 days later or 3 days later and say, oh wait, remember this 3 days ago?
Yeah.
But sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wait, what?
That's true.
They focus on it for long enough to do it that day, and then a week later it's gone. So just sort of tying, for example, the whole chapter, like chapter 1.
Right.
When you get to the last section, the first section is like forever ago.
Sure.
So kind of bringing that along and
Do
bringing
you
it with us the whole time.
Incorporate a review day then, typically before
I
the
do,
test?
yeah, before the test, a day, sometimes 2 days if it's pretty heavy stuff.
Sure.
But again, that's something where you're taking 5 different topics we've talked about and smashing them into one day all at once.
Yeah.
So if I can avoid a little bit of that and say, okay, and if after we get through the first section, if I can kind of include that for 10 minutes, and then you say, okay, we actually had an example from section 2 for 4 days in a row. So that's something that they should just sort of get in their heads. So when the review comes, it's not, holy cow, I have to learn this all again.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, I just need to remember the details.
I included 4E just technology-wise.
Sure.
I know you use your Corinthian board quite a bit in the front of class. And I noticed your students were plotting points,
Yeah.
but I didn't know how they got to plotting the points. So I thought maybe at times getting the students up there to sort of, with the class watching and you kind of back,
Sure.
just seeing the processes that are going on within your students when they're at the board. So-
Yeah, that is something that I don't do often. I mean, I'm sometimes wary of how much students should do up there just because of the time and making sure I get through everything, and that's just a personal sort of qualm about it.
I noticed that maybe, I know when I thought about it, I was like, maybe he's just worried about getting that lesson done.
It does happen,
But sometimes, it's okay to come back to that lesson the
Right,
next day
right.
and things like that.
And I need to find opportunities where I can do that and see how it works, so I know what sort of things I can just let the students show each other. And if that helps the rest of the class understand better, then it's totally worth it. But I still have that, you try to maintain that sense of control.
Right,
It's hard to
I know, and that's
so-
what I was kind of getting at, is just setting
Yeah.
back a little bit, letting them go up there, and then you can still guide the process.
Yeah.
So we have Chromebooks now, so that would be another thing, that every now and then getting the kids on the
Yep.
Chromebooks and incorporating a lesson.
Yep.
Possibly finding word problems on their own and creating those with their Chromebooks and things, something to think about. And that would be very engaging too, which is one of the things you mentioned earlier that you
Right.
wanted to work on, is being more engaged. So just giving different resources that students can use. To say off another thing, I could have just, basically earlier you talked about exit slips.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the things that I said, how often do you check for understanding in your lessons? So,
Yeah, I try to, usually my understanding checks often just involve soliciting questions.
Sure.
The walk-arounds, which again doesn't necessarily give me the best picture of everyone in the class, kind of a holistic picture. And oftentimes, I'll ask them, how do you feel about this? Do you think you could do this on your own? So do you want to try some examples, or do you want me to do another one? And some will be reluctant to answer that question, Sometimes
Right.
they'll say, all right, who's ready to try it on their own? Who wants to see another example? And who is too lazy to raise their hand? Which someone will always raise their hand, which,
well, some techniques that I wanted to bring past, and I have a resource for you today on checking for understanding. I've got an article here with some top 10 ideas to check for understanding. It's called Beyond the Exit Slip. So after you start to incorporate the exit slip,
Right.
there's some more closure activities you can do with your class here. And so one of the things I noticed is maybe, and I don't know if you're against or not, the whiteboards. Possibly having each kid have a whiteboard. They can hold it up and you can
Right.
kind of quickly scan and see,
Yeah.
did they get it, did they not?
Yeah.
And a thumbs up, thumbs down, and there's a lot more in here. So I've got this resource for you to take with you today. We already went over students modeling the content, just giving a little back to the students.
Yeah.
What did you feel sort of didn't go well with your lesson? Was there anything, or what really worked or didn't work? Just kind of I guess we'll go with what didn't work, if there was anything.
Yeah. I've definitely had worse. And part of it was because they'd had a little bit of introduction to that the previous day.
Did you feel a little
but
rushed trying to get through everything in one?
I do that, yeah, I do feel rushed sometimes. And there were, especially at the end, I had them do another example of where they were supposed to determine the size of their graph, the scale of their graph, and we kind of ran out of time on that one. My other classes, I actually didn't have them graph it, I just said, ask them the questions,
Okay.
What kind of graph would you draw, how big, what would your scale be?
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that would be something where,
But those are those probing questions.
Right,
Those are
right.
good. Yeah.
and those are the ones, and somewhere, something, could be cut out, or finding more time to do one of those where, like I said, I don't have to say very much.
Sure.
Because one of my goals is to try to get them to ask the questions that I ask. I want
Right.
them to ask themselves instead of me having to say it every time. So
Okay.
just to give them, and an exit slip would be a great way to do this, is to give them a set of coordinates and say,
Yes.
graph these,
Right.
Put them on your graph paper, and then I will say nothing. And then it just leaves them open to kind of explore what they want to do. and, make decisions about the size and scale, and then to just see how it works for them.
Oh, and see the different scales they
Right,
use and
right.
just kind of.
Because we talked a little bit with the class about how we could go by 25s or by 50s.
Right.
And it wouldn't be a good idea to go by ones because we need 350.
Yeah, it was 350,
So,
yeah.
for me to not have to say that, and sometimes I just feel compelled, like,
Yeah.
I want them to know, so I just tell them.
Right.
But they don't feel it.
Yeah.
They don't get the sense of why it does or doesn't make sense. So for me to just give it to them and say, try something, and if it doesn't work, then try something else.
Right, if I'm
Right,
over there
I have
numbering by 350, I'm running out of
Right.
paper pretty quick.
Exactly.
But
So-
you learn from that, so
Right,
that's
right.
good. I'm glad that,
So knowing what to do sometimes means knowing what not to do.
awesome.
So just letting them kind of see that for themselves, and not wanting to jump in and say, "Oh, you don't want to do that." Just let them finish.
Right.
Let them take their thoughts to conclusion, and they'll figure out, "Oh, that was a bad idea," and then they'll think better about it next time.
4C it deals with, demonstrates flexibility, responsiveness, and adjusting instruction to meet student needs. So a good way to differentiate is to start doing some group collaborations. You've got, I noticed, great round tables in there
Yeah.
where kids can be really working in groups. So how would you envision that lesson if there was more student collaboration? Do you feel they'd be more engaged?
I think so, and that would be one way to handle the problem of me not being able to check on everyone throughout the lesson. Coming up with maybe some examples that make them be more interdependent, where each person at the table maybe has a different piece of information.
Sure.
I just put them on note cards or something like that and say, your table has to get this task done.
Right.
But one person's not going to be able to do it. So, at any given table, you may have one person that knows what she's doing and doesn't need anybody's help and can just do it, and the other three are left to their own devices. So if we're all interdependent, they have to do a little bit more communication.
Yeah, and it's a good way where a student can model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
and-
others,
and-
definitely.
Yeah, and so, they could have just had one graph at their table and they could have all been working on that graph. So, anyway, I've also got a article here. It's actually got, I think, 50, top 10
Okay.
different type of groupings you can do in class. And they range from think, pair, share to the snowballing method
Sure.
to project-based learning and Socratic. Have you ever heard of Socratic method?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's very
That's
good.
why I ask so many questions.
That's true. I shouldn't.
I was a philosophy major before I was a math teacher. So.
That's why you got the question mark. And
Well,
I love that thing, by the way. It's
thank
always
you.
lit up, and the kids see it,
That's
and
right.
it invites questions.
I hope so.
It does. So we went over what other ways you can assess students. My last thing on a growth area could possibly connecting the lesson to real life experiences. And that deals with 4E, connects students' prior knowledge, life experiences, and interests in the instructional process.
Mm-hmm.
So an idea I maybe thought was you could have, we worked on quadrants, possibly setting, your room up
Sure.
in quadrants in there, and then
Yeah,
having them go to 1 and 2 and 3, and
Right.
The
thought has crossed my mind, and that'd be a great idea, just tape on the floor. And it's difficult with the tables, but, we could use the tables just as, they're just there, so, they're blank spots, you have to pick points in between or something, but that would be something else where they could move around, which I think sometimes sitting there the whole time just kind of, makes them a little bit complacent.
Sure.
And,
Yeah,
to
it's
get
another
them,
season.
to get them up and moving and to experience it, incorporating the kinesthetic intelligences into math can sometimes be difficult for me to think about how to do that. Because it's all so, it's kind of dry and it's just, everything's on paper.
Yeah.
Everything's on paper or just in your mind. It's just ideas and concepts. So trying to work in that kinesthetic activities is something I'd like to do more.
Yeah, and definitely your classroom doesn't always have to be your classroom.
Mhm.
There's definitely, we're always willing to allow you to kind of just get out of there and do what you want to do.
Sure.
And remember I did your observation before, we were dealing with speed.
Right.
And remember some of the things I said about speed?
Yeah.
What did,
So,
you had a student give the definition of speed?
yeah, and you were talking about just, instead of just a verbal demonstration, thinking about actually doing it, you know, estimating speeds of things and comparing what speed means in relation to velocity.
Right.
You could have actually, well, thrown objects around.
You could have.
Yeah.
Or with the notebooks, they could actually have created their own speed or their own word problem dealing with
Sure.
speed and things. So just ideas there. So what are some insights you've gained from this experience? Is there anything you've gained from me being in your classroom?
It's always nice to have perspective because as a teacher, I don't usually get a lot of feedback on methods from the kids.
Yeah.
And the kids, sometimes they'll say, well, that was cool, or that was boring, or things that are kind of hard to decipher, you know, so having the other perspective of, number one, seeing the kids from a different angle, and seeing how they're working in relation to what I'm saying.
Right.
And then just also to kind of look at my methods and say, you know, maybe you see a reason why something I said didn't make sense to the kids, or maybe you see something that they really responded to, which is not something that I always pick up on necessarily. So seeing how the kids react and just how my methods sort of worked or didn't work
Sure.
in the situation.
Yeah, and I just want to say you're definitely a great young teacher, and I think that's what's great about these observations is we can go and we can kind of talk together and go through different growth areas. So reviewing our growth areas, are you able to give them off to me?
Man, I've been here a while.
Cheat sheet.
Just using resources, maybe trying to find a better way of getting the kids to demonstrate to each other using anything, just objects or the board in front of the room. And then assessment was something that I can find different ways to do.
Sure.
Primarily observation now, but also on paper and you know, other, maybe even conferencing with students,
strategies,
you know,
and
things like that. And then just trying to incorporate some more group work and seeing how that works.
Great.
And not relying necessarily on myself, putting all the responsibility on myself, and put that responsibility more on the kids. And then they can tell me what they need, hopefully,
Yes.
and say, well, we tried this, but it didn't work, so what else can we do? Instead of me just dictating, now you're gonna do this, now you're gonna do that.
Well, I want
See how
to
it works.
I want to thank you for the time you spent with me today and on through. And I've enjoyed growing through this process with you, so thanks a lot.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate it.
Yep, appreciate
And
it.
here's some resources, and I also put a hodgepodge of
Yeah.
math teaching strategies on there too, just so you have. All right, thank you.
Yeah.